Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, HRS Sample Design, Weighting, and Complex Variance Estimation. It's developed and presented by the University of Michigan with funds from the National Institute on Aging and hosted by GSA. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the GSA website. A notice to all attendees will be distributed once the recording is available. A question and answer session will immediately follow the live presentation. We will be accepting questions to the questions feature that's accessible on the GoToWebinar panel. Also located there on the panel are downloadable handouts for today, the webinar speaker bios, and a copy of the presentation slides. So while I introduce our speakers for today, please tell us who you are by answering the poll that will appear on your screen momentarily. There we go. The formal presentation will be given by our first speaker, Amanda Soniga, Associate Research Scientist in the Survey Research Center of the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. Conducting the question and answer portion of the program are speakers Sung-Hee Lee, Associate Research Scientist in the Survey Methodology Program at the University of Michigan, and Ryan McCammon, Research Area Specialist Lead. Thank you, Amanda, Sung-Hee, and Ryan for bringing us this important program. I will close the poll so we can see the results, and let's share that. So there you go. That is who is in the audience today.
Okay.
Great. So without further delay, I'll hand the microphone to Amanda.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us for the webinar today, which will provide information on the HRS sample design, weighting, and complex variance estimation. Today, we'll provide a basic understanding of these issues. Then we'll move on to some practical guidance showing you where to find the variables you'll need, some basic guidance on applying weights in your analysis, and finally, some advice on using weights. I want to begin by describing what a complex sample design is and why we employ it. As you know, the objective of a sample is to represent a population of interest. Simple random samples do this in a very straightforward manner, where each sample element has an equal probability of selection, where we sample from a complete list of all elements, and where there's some sampling error associated with sample estimates. An example is your typical political poll. However, a simple random sample is not always optimal or even possible, especially when trying to reach a small segment of the population like the HRS does. So a complex sample design is an alternative. The defining feature is that not all sample elements have equal probability of selection. A complex sample design has two main techniques, stratification and clustering. Stratification is a procedure to classify the target population into subgroups or strata whose members are assumed to be more like each other than members of other strata. Sampling is then done within each stratum. So an example might be a study of English dialects in the United States. These vary significantly by region of the country. So to ensure you capture dialects in each region, you'd first create regional strata and then sample within them and potentially apply different sampling rates across strata. The second main technique is clustering, where the target population is first divided into groups or clusters, then a sample of clusters is randomly selected, and lastly, each member of the cluster is interviewed. An example would be a study of grade school students. So there's no list of names and addresses of all grade school students, but we do have school addresses, and schools have lists of students. But it's not realistic to obtain all of those lists. Rather, we can randomly select a set of schools or clusters and interview all students in the school. So those are the two main techniques, but other design features could be added, such as oversampling of certain populations of interest. So when the entire country is the population of interest, it's not reasonable to do simple random sampling. No list of all U.S. residents exists, and the cost would be prohibitive to locate and interview such a dispersed sample. So the Survey Research Center at the University of Michigan's Institute for Social Research maintains a national sample frame of dwellings for all area probability surveys, and using it, surveys at the ISR implement complex sample designs. So let's begin by considering a generic complex sample design. In the national sample, the entire population is divided and subdivided in several stages. Primary sampling units are formed, which are usually counties or county groups. Within the primary units, cities, towns, and rural areas are the secondary selections. In a third stage of sampling, we select small segments or clusters of dwelling units, And then in a fourth stage, individuals are selected to be interviewed. And this graphic nicely depicts these stages. So HRS uses multi-stage, stratified multi-stage sampling. I want to first note that in 2016, HRS undertook changes to the sample design that improved efficiency and better reflected changing demographics in the nation. So it's important to acknowledge that what follows refers to the historical sample design, which is still very important, of course, since it's the bulk of the data you'll be using. So for cohorts through the mid-baby boomers, the design includes oversampling of Hispanic and African American households. In stage 1, primary sampling units, PSUs, are selected with probability proportional to population size. This means that more populous areas have a greater probability of selection. The map shows the primary sampling units, at least from 1963, which you can see mirror population density. In stage 2A, secondary sample units, SSUs, are selected also with probability proportional to size. The secondary sampling units are blocks or rural chunks. In stage 2B, we assemble a list of all housing units in the SSU from the U.S. Postal Delivery sequence file. In stage 3, individual housing units are selected with probability inversely proportional to size, which evens out the selection probabilities and improves efficiency. In stage 4A, household members are listed with their birth year and relationships. From the list, cohort-eligible units are selected. In stage 4B, if there's more than one eligible unit in the household, one is randomly selected. It's important to note that the HRS represents the non-institutionalized U.S. population at baseline. So the major implication of the HRS sample design is that sample units, both individuals and households, have different probabilities of sample selection. So inferences to the U.S. population will be biased unless sample weights are used in calculating descriptive statistics, such as means and totals. Sample weights account for this differential selection. The sample is geographically stratified and clustered, as we just explained, so variance estimates using standard formulae are not appropriate and need to be corrected in analyses using weights. So now I want to turn to talking a bit about the sample weights. HRS provides household and respondent level sample weights that are constructed to make the HRS weighted sample representative of all U.S. households containing at least one person in the cohort eligible range in the case of household weights, or of all non-institutionalized individuals in the U.S. population age 51 years and older in the case of the respondent level weights. So the baseline sample weight starts from a base weight that accounts for differential probability of selection. It is the inverse of the probability of selection. It is fixed, and by design, positive or non-zero. Then we account for non-response based on patterns of non-response, which is higher for men than women, single than married, young than old, and African American and Hispanic than non-Hispanic white. The final step of the baseline weight is a post-stratification weight that projects the sample to the target population. We use an outside data source with lower non-response as a reference. Previously, we used the current population survey as this data source. The current reference data source is the American Community Survey. Now I want to explain the difference a little bit between the household and respondent weights. Household weights are applied in analyses at the household level, such as if you're studying wealth or housing variables. They're positive as long as one of the respondents is age eligible, an original respondent, living and non-institutionalized. Respondent weights are used in analyses at the respondent level, such as work, health, work, cognition, and so on. Respondent level weights are positive only if the respondent is age eligible, connected to an original respondent, if not an original respondent themselves, living and not institutionalized. Now I'll turn to talking about complex variance estimation. So why is this a concern? Well, the default on most statistical packages assumes a simple random sample, but the complex sample design, as we've described, is not. In general, in a complex sample design, stratification reduces sampling variance, clustering increases sampling variance, and the sample is not self-weighting, which itself increases sampling variance. Therefore, we need to correct the standard errors in analysis using design variables. We use two sample design variables, stratum and secu, which I'll describe in a moment. Design effects are a ratio of the sampling variance under a multi-stage complex design to the sampling variance under a simple random sample design. Design effects represent the effect of the complex sample design on the variance. Another way to think about it is as a measure of efficiency of the multi-stage sample design. A few other things are worth noting about design effects. Specifically, they're in relation to specific variables. There are no overall design effects for a survey, and they will be highest for variables that are more homogeneous within clusters and that are strongly related to the weights. Taken together, sample weights affect point estimates and may influence variances and standard errors, but adjustment for complex sample design affects only variances and standard errors. Now I want to take a moment to talk about where to find the weight and design variables. So as I mentioned, HRS provides wave-specific weights at both the household and respondent levels. These are available in the tracker file. The variable name for the household weight is XWGTHH and XWGTR for the respondent weight. X ranges from A for 1992 wave to P for the 2016 wave. The current tracker file has weights through 2014, but the 2016 weights should be available very soon. The design variables used in analysis to adjust the variance are called stratum and secu, as I mentioned. Stratum ranges from 1 to 56 and is a variable that defines the sampling error computation strata of the HRS data. Due to their population size, 2 strata are defined for New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Otherwise, each self-representing design stratum is represented by 1 stratum. Note that the values of stratum will be different starting with the 2016 wave because of changes, as I mentioned, to the sampling strategy. The secu variable is the stratum half-sample code for analysis of sampling error using the balanced repeated replication method or approximate 2 per stratum Taylor series method. Within the self-representing sample error strata, the half-sample units are created by dividing sample cases into random halves, so it's coded 1 and 2. And you always need 2 PSUs per stratum for the analysis to work. Now let's talk a bit about applying weights and design variables in analysis. In Stata, this SVY command is used for the analysis of complex survey data. This shows you some Stata code to run descriptives on the stratum variable. This slide shows the survey mean command that allows you to apply the weights, the stratum, and the secu variable to, in this case, the self-rated health variable. So these results reflect the weighted mean with a corrected standard error. This slide shows an error that can arise when you subset the data. In this case, running the mean for self-rated health only among those with Mexican ethnicity. This resulted in a stratum with only 1 primary sampling unit, which is a problem. The solution is to combine the stratum with 1 PSU, the one that has 1 PSU you can see with the asterisk, combine it with the adjacent stratum. An even better solution, however, and the recommended procedure, is to use a subsetting command. In Stata, the subpop command is part of the SVY command, and in SAS, you use the domain command within the survey procedure. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but we've provided links to more detailed articles about using these subsetting commands. And this slide provides the Sas Code to run a simple table of gender by arthritis, and you can see where you apply the weight, the stratum, and the secu variables. And then in SPSS, you conduct a 2-stage procedure. This slide shows you step 1, and then here's step 2 of the procedure for applying these variables in SPSS. So how important is it to use the weights? Well, their importance varies by the variable and type of analysis. It's widely agreed that using the weights is crucial in descriptive analysis, especially if you want to be able to provide population estimates of your variable of interest. That is particularly important for variables that are closely related to the sample design, especially race and ethnicity, and any variables that are strongly correlated with these. However, the use of weights is more controversial in structural modeling. Some disciplines would argue that if the model is properly specified, weighting won't reduce bias, but it can introduce bias if the weights are correlated with the dependent variable, and weighting can actually reduce efficiency by introducing variance. So our advice is to look to your own discipline for guidance in instructional modeling. Finally, we want to offer some advice on using the weights in different analyses. In cross-sectional analyses, as we mentioned, the respondent level weight you use is XWGTR, again, where X is the wave indicator. So that's your simplest possible analysis. In a household level analysis, your weight is XWGTHH. And note, though, that although HRS does not sample people living in nursing homes at baseline, if they move to a nursing home at follow-up, they're interviewed there. So there is a nursing home weight that can be applied to that sample. The weight variables for most of the supplemental studies, subsamples, or off-year studies are found in the tracker file. For example, XWGTR-DB is for the diabetes supplemental study, XBio WGTR is for the biomarkers, XPM WGTR is for the physical measures, and XLB WGTR is for the psychosocial leave behind. And again, these are all wave-specific weight variables. Others can be found with their data, such as the Aging Demographics and Memory Study and CAMS. Their weight variables are in the data set. They're not in Tracker. They're in the data set for those supplemental studies. In longitudinal analyses, you have two choices. To apply the weight associated with the final wave, the terminal year of data you are analyzing, or the first wave of data in the analysis, the base year. You'd use the terminal weight in retrospective analyses where you're trying to model the histories of individuals or households who were in the sample as of the terminal year. For prospective analyses, where the goal is to model or describe the future experiences of the base year population, you would apply the weight associated with the first wave in the analysis. In some analyses, you'll end up with respondents who have a zero value on the weight. In this case, it may be very helpful for you to figure out why, and there is a variable specifying the reason for zero weight called why zero weight. And I've listed the codes in the code book here. In many instances, you'll want to combine data from the core interview with data from a supplemental study. In this instance, the first thing to do is to think about your research question and the relevant population and choose the weight from the more restrictive population. For example, respondents who got the physical measures as part of the enhanced face-to-face interview, measured height and weight, timed walk, balance, etc., are a subset of the core respondents. So you'd use the XPM-WGTR, the physical measures weight. Similarly, you might use data from more than one subsample, such as the psychosocial leave behind questionnaire and the physical measures. Again, choose a weight from the more restrictive population, or if it's the same reference population, start with the weight from the larger sample size. In this instance, you can carry out a weighting class adjustment or use propensity score weighting to adjust the selected weights for those in both samples. Finally, as you know from watching the introduction tutorial or webinar, the enhanced face-to-face interview is on a random half sample of the core that alternates every other wave. The weight for the half sample is constructed so that it sums to the population size. In other words, each half sample is representative of the U.S. population since it's a random half of the core. So even though you can combine two waves of data, as many people do with the enhanced face-to-face information, the weights then will not properly sum to the population. So this is only an issue if you want to report the number of individuals in the population with some characteristic. Otherwise, the weights work, and you would just combine the weights in the same way that you would combine variables from the two half samples, namely rename your variables. You can drop the wave prefix is one way to do it, then stack the data. And if you want to know more about this particular point, join us for the next webinar on using the psychosocial data, where we're going to provide detailed information on this stacking procedure. And then lastly, I want to point out some references for you, additional to the ones that we provided as background. And you go to the website, and under Documentation, go to the drop-down menu and click on Survey Design. And then under Survey Design, there's a whole section with weight information. And there's 4 documents there I would recommend to you for background reading. And then as a nice background text, the text called Applied Survey Data Analysis, 2nd edition by Haringa, West, and Berglund is really an excellent general reference. It has a lot of math in it. Something that doesn't, if you want something very good and a plain explanation, is the Analysis Factor is a website. They have a very, very nice module on complex sample design. So if you're really starting out, that might be a kind of a nice place to start as well. And then for much more detail, the applied survey data analysis. I guess, Judy, before we turn to questions, I do want to make one more point. I think Sun Yi and I have talked, and she's made this point before too, and that's that these kinds of surveys are sort of living, breathing things that change and evolve over time. And so the sampling procedure that we use, it's updated, not frequently, but it updates every now and then. And this, as we talked about earlier, the 2016 was kind of a major update. And one of the documents in there actually describes more about it on the website. But just to make the point that we don't design it in 1992 and it's fixed for all time. There's always tweaking that is to make it more efficient, that is in particular to respond to changes in the population. The U.S. population has changed a lot in terms of its demographic characteristics in 25 years. So, okay, that's it. And now we have a nice chunk of time for questions.
Terrific. Oh, thank you, Amanda. So just a reminder for the attendees, you can type and send questions using that question feature in the dashboard, probably accessible on the right-hand side of your screen if you haven't moved it. We will not be using the raise hand feature today. So please, if you have a question, use that question panel and type them in. And just a reminder that we are recording this session, and we'll send you an access link by email once it's available. And also, NOAA webinar survey will automatically launch after the webinar. In an effort to continue improvement, we'd like to hear your thoughts. So please provide feedback by clicking that survey link at the end of the webinar. All right, so it looks like we've got a couple of questions coming in here. Let's start at the top here. Very first one, how do the respondent level weights take into consideration the non-independence of spouses who are both included as respondents?
Sun Yi has an answer.
Oh, so the spouses that are not age eligible would get 0 weight. And the Y0 weight variable that Amanda went over will indicate that information.
If both spouses are cohort eligible, then they will both have positive weights. One thing to keep in mind when using the stratification and cluster indicators in carrying out your analysis is that by design, they will, the cluster indicator will adjust your standard errors based on the observed correlation within clusters, irrespective of the source of that correlation. So whether it be because people live in the same neighborhood or the same household, the procedure is agnostic as to the source of the correlation.
Brian, so the participant actually said, does the respondent level weight, is it, I thought maybe the household level weight is accounting for that, the couple, sort of the interdependent.
The weight itself, oh, I'm sorry, yes, so the weight
is not
would, I mean, the weight is affected by household composition and the number of eligible respondents in the household. But in terms of accounting for the non-independence of 2 eligible respondents in a household, that's where the design indicators come in.
Yeah.
Specifically the SECU.
Right. SECU is the one accounting for the clustering. So. Okay.
All righty.
Hey.
Here's another one. What about pooling all birth cohorts data for analysis? Should we use weights? If so, how?
Pooling all birth cohorts.
I think we need a little more clarification on pooling all birth cohort, because the
We
data
do.
Are you agreeing, Ryan, that we need?
I agree that I'm sorry. A little clarification would be helpful. Is this a question perhaps about pooling across waves? So that you would be considering, for example, those who were 55 and older in a series of interviews?
Yep, pooling cross waves is the clarification.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds right, Ryan. So you want to take a stab at that?
Well, I mean, strictly speaking, the study doesn't. I mean, I think in these instances, it's always important to consider the population reference. That is to say, who is it that you're trying to represent? And that population has both a set of defining characteristics, in this case in terms of birth year, but also in terms of time and place, right? So if you were to pool all waves and not consider when the data was collected, I'm not sure it's hard to identify what the population that you're trying to represent would be.
Right.
Sung-Yi, do you want to say more about that?
I agree. I guess pooling across waves, I guess we need a little more information on the purpose of the analysis. And going back to your point, what is the population that is going to be addressed in that pooled analysis? That will determine what kind of weight should be applied.
And Judy, could you go back one slide from where we are now?
Sure.
Thank you. Oh, nope, I'm sorry, the other way, I guess. My mistake. There we go.
Back up.
Oh.
I just want to point out this HRS questions at umich.edu email address. And if you have questions that are, well, either general or specific, that in some way you don't get a satisfying answer to in today's webinar, please do feel free to send them to hrsquestions@umich.edu, and they will be routed to the appropriate person here at HRS. And I'd like to think that we do a pretty snazzy job of helping users with their questions using the HRS data. So that might be a place in this case where we could get some more context about the analysis that you have in mind.
Yeah, I'll just put a fine point on that, Ryan, by saying that sometimes users do bring their very specific analysis questions to HRS questions, and you might end up getting into a back and forth, with somebody like Ryan until you really get your question answered. So I can't say enough good things about HRS questions at umich.edu. So please do use it if this didn't answer your question.
Great. And we have a couple here around genetic data. For example, will using respondent weights affect how we use the genetic data, such as, for example, polygenic scores? And again, about genetic data, are we using weights to deal with analysis in HRS? Just a couple around genetic data.
Let me take a stab at that, Ryan and Sung-Yi, and then you guys can jump in.
Please do.
I would say that we offer a wide variety, or a variety anyway, of genetic products associated with HRS, that are derived from HRS data from our collection of saliva samples that are genotyped. Some of those products, and I would say that the polygenic scores are a good example of things, telomere length, are a good example of products that we have constructed and made available just as public data products on the HRS website. And that score applies to an individual in the same way that any other phenotypic characteristic that's from the survey applies to the individual. So I think it would be appropriate in that case to go ahead and use the weights depending on the goals of your analysis with the variables that are at the individual level. If you are working with the GWAS data, I don't think the weights are appropriate. That's an entirely different thing. That's not not your typical analysis. And I think that's a good first approximation. Does that help? Anything to add to that, Ryan?
Amanda, in that instance, if you were concerned with the various genetic scores, you would use the biomarker subsample weight?
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's right.
So in this case, it would say for 2014, then that would be O bio weight R.
Correct. That's right.
And you can find that in the tracker file.
Good. Yes.
Okay. There are a couple around RAND. So for example, how does the RAND version address this? I'm using the RAND wealth data for total wealth, a highly skewable variable, and would like to break into quartiles for analysis. When I apply SVY commands in SATA, I can't get the median. Is there a way to do this? So how's HRS and RAND data?
Let me take a first stab at that again and let you guys weigh in. But RAND is simply a process-cleaned version of the HRS raw data. So it is the same. It is exactly the same respondent for respondent. The N in the tracker should be the same as the N in the longitudinal the crosswave products that they put together. So there's no difference there. It is now you're using if you're using their total household wealth variable, that is a variable that they've gone to the trouble to construct from the many sources of wealth information in the raw data. In terms of weighting, the weights and the stratum and the secu variables are all in the RAND data, and you would you just apply them the same way. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's exactly my answer.
Yeah. Ryan, any other thoughts there?
There is, if this user would send their question again to HRS questions, there is a fairly comprehensive FAQ on this from Stata.
Oh, about the median problem?
That's right.
Oh, good. Yeah, so actually the answer there is, yeah.
Looks like a Stata issue.
It sounds like a Stata issue, and it's in the FAQ on the website, but we can send you that if you respond.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Here's a question. In the 2012 HRS data, there are only 300 Asian participants. Do they present the Asian population in the U.S.?
I would say no. One, because HRS is not conducted in Asian languages. It's only in English and Spanish. So that Asian sample would represent Asian population who speak English, not necessarily other languages. So I would be cautious in using that and trying to represent something bigger than what it is intended to be.
I am wondering why we are seeing participants with age in 20s or 30s in the sample.
Those are partners. Those are spouses or partners, and they should have a 0 weight. So that's how you can check. If you've watched the introductory webinar or video, you know that all that we talked about today about sampling people and the trouble we go to find the person, you know, at that last stage. If you picture the graphic, that last stage, if we pick somebody in the household who's 51 and older in the cohort that we're trying to recruit, or 51 to 56. Better point. We also, if they are married or partnered, we invite their spouse or partner to become a study participant as well. And so those 20-somethings and 30-somethings and 40-somethings, those are spouses or partners. And Ryan made the point, so they have a 0 weight. And Ryan made the point about, because sometimes both members of the household are in the age-eligible region, and then they'll have a weight. Likewise, over time, because it's a longitudinal study, spouses and partners can age in, and then they can go from having over time a 0 weight to a weight.
Another question around couples. This one is learning how to use weights for dyadic data analysis for couples.
So what would a dyadic analysis, what would that look like?
Yeah. Ryan, have you done any couples analysis?
Well, I have not specifically. There is a paper that I have in mind, but what I would say here is it depends on what you mean by dyadic analysis. If it is a study of individuals and their partners, then that's a respondent level analysis. And so you would use you would weight using the respondent level weight. So it's an analysis of me and my spouse, the way in which things going on with my spouse affects my life, or something like that. If it is an analysis of dyads, where the unit of analysis, if you think about your data set, each record would represent a dyad, then that's really a household level analysis.
I would caution that it would be just a coupled household, not entire household.
Right.
That's right. Right. There are plenty of households in the HRS that consist of just a single individual.
Yeah. That's right. Coupled households would be the right way to phrase that. Good.
Here is, are there any plans to construct a weight for the deceased individuals who are part of the HRS sample? For instance, we're using exit data.
I don't know about that. Ryan, do you have any? Yeah.
I've not been in discussions where that's been discussed as a data product. although I do think that there's a larger conversation coming internally regarding the weighting products that we release. So the short answer is no. A longer answer would consider the use of the individual's weight prior to their death, and I would think that would be representative. They would represent deaths in that way. Sung-Yi, does that seem correct? I mean, I'm a little bit off the cuff here.
I have to think about like what population, again, like goes back to like what population we're talking about. So if I were to use the respondent weight that was given to the deceased person right before when they deceased, that weight will represent whoever was represented by that weight, right? So applying that weight to talk about population that will be eligible for HRS in the next wave or something like that will be can be misleading. It's a more conceptual thing that we'll have to think about if we are to create weights for the deceased.
But they don't exist now. And,
they don't. Yeah.
We're not sure. It's above our pay grade at this point. But again, send it to HRS questions. It could end up routing to someone who might have a different answer. But I think it's fair to say that it's not coming anytime soon.
Why does using the domain statement in SAS stop the less than 2 PSU error?
It's because when you use domain statement, instead of dropping out people who do not belong to the subgroup, it applies zero weight and does analysis. So it takes care of that problem, the problem that you may encounter if you subset the data and do the same analysis.
Yeah, in other words, the domain, both of those, subpop and domain, retain the integrity of the entire sample. They don't chop it up. You have all of the sample, and then the analysis is subgrouping them and not throwing any data away. All of the data continues to be used in the analysis. It's very worth learning how to do.
Mm-hmm. Any recommendations or references for accounting for attrition in longitudinal analyses?
Take a look at Chapter 11 in the Haringa, West, and Berglund volume. They go through a couple of different options there.
Can you hold on a second, Judy? Ryan, is there any easy way to summarize them, or?
Well, you're going to use essentially you're going to use the base weight, so the weight from the year in which individuals are selected into your analysis.
Right. The first wave, you start observing them, whatever that happens to be.
Or you're right.
Yeah.
That you start observing them in your analysis, and then you're going to apply an adjustment to subsequent waves, and so this right away becomes specific to the analytic techniques used. Whether your ability to specify the model with using the base weight and a weight that represents adjustment in subsequent waves, or whether you're going to make an adjustment to that base weight and use it only. So No, that's not a very satisfying answer, but in some ways the answer is it's a little bit complicated, and it depends on your analysis and the statistical technique that you're going to use.
Okay. The next question, if you're using multiple cohorts, HRS, WB, etc., in your analysis and want to apply base year weights, should you combine weights from each base year, like 1992, 1998, 2004, for example?
Yes. The short answer to that question, in my opinion, is yes. So if you're, this comes back, I guess, to this question about pooling a little bit. But you certainly can, if your year one, time one in your analysis is, if time one in the analysis varies by respondent, you can use the weight from that year that is your time one for those respondents to correct for differential probability of selection. Sung-Yi?
Yeah, and I think the analysis would apply if you are to represent people who are ages between 51 to 56, throughout these years that you are combining, if that makes sense. The concept is a little vague. If that is who you want to portray in your analysis, then, I mean, there's no reason why you shouldn't go ahead and do the analysis, but just check whether that's what you want to do or not.
And you're combining the weights. So what mechanically, how are you doing it?
You can stack them.
You're stacking them.
Yeah.
You're just saying if your base year weight for some respondents, say, is 1998, you use F weight R for those folks, and if it were 2004 for others, you'd use J weight R for those. You just create a variable that was weight R that was equal to F weight R for those entering in 98, for example, when you're using the 1998 data, and for those entering the study, entering your analysis in 2000, you'd use the G weight R.
I just wanted to emphasize, because sometimes these questions are less conceptual and more mechanical, and I think this, literally you are combining them in that manner. You want one, because you'll see when you apply it, it only takes one weight. You have to have one weight variable, and so it's a question of how you're combining it. So I think you give a nice description.
All right. Is there a plan to construct nursing home weights for early waves prior to 2000 wave of HRS? Older birth cohorts are selectively removed from analysis the way things stand because as they age into nursing homes, they're missing. Thacker file suggests sometime before 2000 wave had been interviewed.
Ryan, do you know about that?
The answer is that no, there won't be weights created for nursing home residents prior to 2000. Part of the way the sample design works is that individuals are not eligible for selection into the sample if they are in a nursing home. So the only way in which we pick people up and the way in which we come to be representative of the nursing home population is by aging in. And in those years prior to 1998, that's not generally the way the sample is constructed. So for example, in the ahead cohorts, those born in 1923 and before, if you look just at those who are sampled, we miss a decent, we miss nursing home, we miss existing nursing home residents. So the reason in which we're comfortable with our representation of the nursing home population after 1988, so 2000 forward, is that by picking up all birth cohorts such that in 1988 they were 51 and older, we pick people up as they age into the nursing home. So I don't know what limits there might be on our availability of information to construct those weights for prior to 2000, but conceptually, from the point of view of the sample design, we don't represent them.
Sounds right.
Okay. I wonder, I would like to know to what extent weights are important when the Bayesian method is used.
I believe the Bayesian, analysis still tells you, as Amanda pointed out, if you're doing a descriptive analysis, applying weight doesn't hurt. It can protect you from potential misspecification of your prior and other things. And for more model, like running models, it sort of depends on the discipline. So as Amanda suggested, following your discipline sort of approach, discipline-specific approach would make sense. What I personally recommend people to do is, if you're doing structure sort of a modeling work, run both weighted and unweighted analysis, and oftentimes they should go together. If you see overlapping discrepancy between the two, you probably should look into the analysis more in detail.
You're right. In other words, maybe your model isn't as well specified as it might be if there's a very big difference between the weighted and unweighted.
But descriptive analysis, we recommend using weights.
100%.
Yeah, no matter what.
Okay. Can you please explain the difference in using SVY set versus SVY subpop when using HRS data?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Yep, the difference in using SVY set versus SVY subpop when using HRS.
Sounds like a data question, am I correct?
Yeah. Yes, it's a data question. And unfortunately, I think you have 3 SAS users.
But I do think that the...
Do you have any sense, Brian?
Well, I believe that the answer is that in SVY set, you'll specify your weight variable as well as the stratum and secu indicators. And then when you are conducting a particular analysis, say, I don't know, means or something like that, prior to specifying the command, if you want it for a subpop, you specify SVY prior to the command to indicate that the weights and sample design indicators are to be used, and then you indicate your subpop prior to the command, because you may want to use different subpopulations in different portions of your analysis. So you don't specify the subpop in the SVY set. statement.
Oh, I got it. Yeah. So it goes. In other words, the subpop command is specific to the particular analysis you're running, right? Yeah. So if it's a DES C, it goes with that. Is that what you're saying, Ryan?
That's right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. And a follow-on additional question, when do weights for 2016 plan on being released?
We're currently working on the preliminary weights. We have a couple hurdles that we need to iron out. But that much I can tell you at the moment, because I'm working on it right now.
Very likely by late spring.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Another question about 2016. Did you add sexuality and gender identity questions in 2016?
I don't think so.
I think there was a discussion, but I don't know what the final decision was.
I think there's been discussion, a lot of discussion about this, but I don't think in the end we have either of those measures.
You can probably check through the code book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the 2016 data is available.
I'll look while we're answering more questions, but I'm pretty sure.
And more questions about the 2016 data. Will, I guess, RAND release the RAND HRS data file, including 2016?
I'm sorry, say that again?
I guess the timing or when RAND releases the RAND HRS data file in 2016.
You mean when will 2016 data be part of RAND? Is that?
I think that's the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I do know that they release, they release versions at different times, sort of as soon as they're ready, and so I don't know exactly what the timing will be. So yeah, it's we only have, I guess, through 2014 in general. Yeah. And they will eventually be I'm sure they're probably working furiously on it right now, adding 2016, but I'm not sure about the ETA. But I would urge you to email the RAND help desk, and I'll get you that right now. The RAND help desk question is RAND HRS help. No, I'm sorry. It's, which one is it? Oh yeah, RAND HRS help at rand.org. Go ahead and email them and see what they say. They'll probably have a better answer for you.
Yeah, this comes up every couple of years, as it turns out. Given the HRS interview schedule, and one of the things to keep in mind is that 2016, the 2016 HRS data collection actually ran into 2018 because of the addition of, because 2016 is a sample refresh year, so we added 6 new birth cohorts. And so, yes, it seems like here we are in the spring of 2019, and why isn't this all buttoned up? And the answer is because the 2016 data collection took substantially longer than a typical core interview does.
Okay, and I stand corrected, and so I learned. I'll say this: I learn something new about HRS every day that I work here, I think. And to the previous question, the 2016 wave does have sexual orientation. It is variable PB135, and it is in the demographics section.
And if I'm not completely incorrect, I think there was an age limit in asking that question.
That
So it
sounds
is
right.
possible that it was asked only on the new incoming cohort.
Yep, and so here's why that's exactly right, is that the sample size there is only like, you know, a little, almost 4,500, something like that, 4,300 people answered that question. So that would be the new cohort. Yeah. Who are the late baby boomers born 60 to 65. Okay, good.
And if I may add a little more to the RAND data file, being available with the 2016 HRS data, I would assume that it will take a little bit of time because the weight we plan to release sometime very soon will be just preliminary weight in 2016. We're doing substantial work on non-response adjustment at the moment at the same time, and that way will be finalized probably later than the spring of this year. And RAND data will, include the final weight that we will prepare. So it'll be, contingent upon when that becomes available and a lot of other things that RAND will need to work on for their own data set.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I can't believe how quickly this 60 minutes went by. Amanda, Singhi, and Ryan, it's been a real pleasure learning about HRS sample design weighting and complex variance estimations today. And we thank everyone for participating. This is the end of the program.